everyone. It's time for another gathering of the Church of Texas MLS. Does that make me the Reverend? I don't know. I'm Reverend John Arnold of the Striker Texas MLS Podcast. I'm joined by Chris Bills, Deacon Bills in Austin. How are you, brother?
I'm I'm good, brother. We got brother Victor over to
Ooh,
your left.
Oh, my brother,
Victor,
testify.
Victor is about to testify, and we're going to bear witness. So Victor Ariza talking about the weekend. First, let's run through the scores, then we'll look ahead to next weekend. But the way the show is going to work today, we're going to talk a little bit about each of the three MLS teams in Texas, looking back the weekend, looking forward to the next weekend and next week in the case of FC Dallas. If you listen to the show before, you probably know how it works. FC Dallas topped the LA Galaxy 1-0 at Toyota Stadium. Chris Bills was in attendance as Austin FC overcame Sporting Kansas City 2-0, a victory there against the 10-man Sporting, one of the worst teams in the West. We'll get into that in a few moments. But, Victor, the Houston Dynamo went up to Philadelphia, and minute 23, they go down 1-0. This is all right. They can bounce back from this.
Well,
Minute 42, they go down 2-0. Okay, kind of still in this one. Before the halftime break, they're down 3, and it ends up being 6-0. Loss that you called the worst in the history of the Houston Dynamo. It wasn't pretty.
well, it is by the largest
Why
margin.
is this the worst? Statistically, it's the worst. Culturally, contextually, is it the worst? And if so, why?
Yeah, I think you put some thought into it. It is because this is supposed to be a different change of direction for the team, right? And the worst thing you or at least the thing you didn't think was going to happen was that they'd be going backwards in a sense, right? That you'd like to see some progress. You at least like to say, all right, you know what, maybe they're not making the playoffs, but there's things here that you can kind of point to that things are going in the right direction. And I think, they're only 5-6 points out from the last playoff spot. Essentially they still got a shot. But from everything we've seen this season, from the moves that they have yet to make with this roster, from the adjustments that have yet to happen during the game, I think anybody watching this team that has had a close eye on it has to say, this is it. I mean, that's pretty much how it is. It was a big gut punch. I know people are trying to give Philadelphia credit. It's not the fact that they lost to Philly, right? One of the best teams in MLS currently. It's how they lost. It's how they kind of just gave this game away. It's how they weren't even in it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you would expect like some fight back, even when they go down 2. Like I said, you think, okay, well, they're still in this game. Yeah, sure, they struggle on the road, but there wasn't really that sort of answering the
And the
bell
thing
as it
is,
kept ringing, right?
Philly wasn't even trying to embarrass them. To be honest, they were just really effective with their opportunities.
Right.
There was, I think, in the early moments, and maybe it's really every Dynamo game is kind of like that. In the early moments, they'll give you some fight, they'll hang around. Eventually, they allow the first goal, and then it just kind of starts going downhill. When it's credit that they've had a couple results on the road. I think you have to measure the opposition there, right? San Jose, LA Galaxy. With not as strongest lineup, right? Miami, in some of its worst moments of this season, and especially the biggest thing is that we go back to the beginning of the season and the signs were there, right? We said they had a good home schedule to start. Well, they dropped 20 points at home this season, right? They've only had 4 wins. They're 4-4-4. To be able to get back in the playoff race, essentially, it's almost kind of hilarious that they could still just winning their playoff games, getting some road results, maybe, but it's easier said than done.
I think you sort of touched on this, but the result on itself, or like the 3 points dropped on their own at Philadelphia, on the road, maybe not as big of a deal. But we talked about this for months leading up to Hector Herrera coming. We've touched on it on this show that it's got to be point and plug. You got to be ready to go, and this club has got to take off when he gets here, because you've got an opportunity. We felt like Houston was sort of hanging around, in position to make a charge. And I just wonder, if we knew it, certainly the front office should have known, and certainly Paulo Nagamura should have known, certainly the guys in the locker room should have known. Where's the blame fall? Is it just everybody, or where do you feel like this club has failed to recognize the moment that they're in and pull together, rather than it seems like they're falling apart?
Yeah, obviously, deeper dive for those who want to get into this, the Striker Texas or the Striker.com. Of course, old habit, right?
Yep.
No, but look, I think there's certainly blame to go around for everyone, but I think ultimately it starts at the top, right? I mean, it's the changes have to come from the ownership, and I've said this. I think there's only two groups that can really inspire this change and force this change. It's the owner, Ted Siegel, right? We've seen him make some moves, and credit to him, but I think there needed to be a bit more turnover, or just a lot more decisions made at this point. Maybe it's a cautious approach, but I think again there were signs there. And the other one is the fan base, right? Yeah, and I think they have a more than a right to have their say, right? Especially if this is true, if season tickets for next year renewals, it's time, and they're getting charged way more, and the product on the field hasn't really improved. I mean, then they have more than the right. And I think I've always told fans, have your say. Don't do the opposite and just kind of go quiet in the corner. This is the time to talk. This is the time to speak, and this is the time to essentially demand some moves.
I mean, look, they're sitting, as you mentioned, Victor. So it's an interesting spot because they're 6 points out of the playoffs in the Western Conference. Of course, they could make up that gap, and maybe they will, and we'll certainly be talking about it on this show. They also have more defeats than all but one MLS team so far this year. And we really did say, hey, they can't get in too big of a hole. They can't, because Ache will change things. I saw a comment last week. I'm just paraphrasing. I wish I had found the quote, but Pat Onstad was on a radio show. I'm not sure if it was with our friend Glenn Davis or with someone else, but he was on a radio show. Someone tweeted the quote that he said he would put his midfield trio of Carrasquilla, Ache, and Matias Vera up against any other trio in the league. Now, I think two of those players are internationals in CONCACAF that I see a lot of, that I'm impressed by, that are good. And I'm not trying to make this a Matias Vera hate fest, but I think when you look around the league, you can quite quickly say LAFC's midfield trio
easily find way better midfielders than Matias Vera.
I think you look and you say, if you're going to say starting midfield units, I mean, even in the West, there's probably 3 or 4 better, and so that's where I do.
I mean, I put Austin. I put Austin above Houston.
Yep. I would too. Yeah. I would too. No, I think and that's where I get a little concerned, maybe, Victor, when you're saying, hey, there needs to be this recognition from the club, look, obviously a 6-0 loss sort of puts things in perspective. I don't think that would be the same tone struck now, but you do wonder, hey, what's the kind of long-term plan for this team? And even the short-term plan, as this transfer window is still open, we saw a move, which is necessary, but I think the leaders of this team need to understand what the expectation is and exactly what their team is capable of. And when you say something like that, I think Onstad's great. Don't hear me wrong. I think he's a good GM. I just think maybe there needs to be a little bit more public-facing realism.
Yeah, and it's funny because that interview was actually one of his most transparent interviews. He flat out said, we're not a playoff team right now. We got to get better. There was a lot of things that I think you pull from that, and it's very different from what was here before. I think a lot of fans came out, and it was a positive interview. It was exactly what they want to see, right? That one quote obviously kind of stands out, and it's I agree. I think it's not. I think it has the potential. Maybe if Vera were to recover some of his form, I don't think currently it is the best midfield trio. It's not. It's Matias Vera has left a lot to be desired. Hector Herrera, you could make an argument that maybe he's not being played in the best position, but he's certainly not in his best form. I mean, he just arrived. Carrasquilla, obviously, I think has been probably one of the better players this season. But it's collectively, and then just sticking to this game in Philadelphia, you can blame some of those goals on Matias Vera. I mean, that's exactly why they're not the best 3, right? It's funny because it's you kind of said, John, right? Like what can fans point to? I mean, that's the thing. I mean, there's very little to point to say it's going in the right direction. At times you have, I don't think a lot of people have the answer to what they're actually trying to do. What is the plan, right? I mean, it sort of
I mean, I think
there hasn't been a consistent starting 11. There hasn't been I guess that's the point. What is their strategy when they're playing? I mean, they've tried to do the possession thing
when they're playing and when they're not playing, Victor. Because I would also point to, I think Siegel, he comes in, he's trying to make a splash. He signs like Herrera. Does he fit in this team? Yeah, like you can make him fit. I think they're a better team with him than without, despite the result in Philadelphia. But at the same time, like, you don't have this sort of like, oh, we're trying to be LAFC, where it's like the signing is followed with 3 or 4 other big signings, and you say, how is this guy,
right.
in this, LAFC's case, Gareth Bale on TAM, how do they still have a DP spot open? Like, it's not this like, oh, Houston's building a super team, but it's also not Houston's developing from the academy. It's also not Houston is taking like a MLS veteran approach. Like, it seems like a little bit. I don't see the overarching strategy. Maybe it will become clear in the next weeks, months, even year or two, because I do think that this is a team that you could kind of strip down and start to rebuild kind of from its very base, because we haven't seen a lot of success from the Dynamo since those early glory years. Real quick, before we move on from this game, I don't think anyone cares about team MVP awards, but if Steve Clark is building his case, this is a pretty darn good game for his case, right? He goes out early and they missed him.
Oh, he took that first goal, so I mean, I don't know how he'll take one on the chin at least. No, he's been good, right? He's not the be all end all problem, right? I think the organization in front of him, right, and I think having better defenders in front of him, I think has been part of the issue. Again, I think you have a few players that stand out. I don't think they have enough starting caliber players to make a starting lineup in MLS to be more than competitive, to be able to win games, win consistently, and we're seeing that.
Yeah, I don't want to skip ahead to Kansas City, but something that John said, I think, stands out with the conversation that I was having with Daniel Sperry and some other folks in Kansas City, just about, what is your calling card as an MLS club? How are you building your roster? What's the most dependable thing? And I think for years, Peter Vermees and I look at Houston as one of these clubs too that has to find a way, without a great academy structure, which Kansas City maybe has had a few of those pieces. To look at what Colorado's doing, look at what Montreal's doing. Those teams are sort of sweeping away those mid-level, those key roster pieces. Austin FC's even fit into that mold a little bit, and all of a sudden there's 28 teams in this league. It's a lot harder to find the diamonds in the rough from within the league. So then you have to have a really good scouting department and be able to find guys like, and I guess Houston's found a few here and there, like Carrasquilla, but they've also missed on a few. And you have to really have. You have to really have a calling card if you're going to be a club that's going to dig itself.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? If we go to the calling card, what have they said? They said they want to be a hardworking team, right? No stars. The group is it's all about the collective. But let me tell you something. They're not that hardworking. I've been to some of their trainings. It's relaxed as hell. All right. And they don't work harder than any other MLS team, and that's the reason why they're in the hole they're in right now. And that's the reason why I don't have the faith that they're going to get out of this hole and get into the playoffs.
Playing hard can't be your calling card. Every team plays hard. Every team works hard, right? They really do need something, I think, where you say, yeah, this is exactly what they do. The other thing, as we move on, people, I think they were right to move on from Tab as a head coach. One thing he was absolutely right about when he arrived, and he kept speaking when he was there, he's like, listen, Houston is as big as, a country he knows well in Uruguay. Their best academy product ever, Victor? Is it Memo?
No, it is, and it's abysmal.
And then you look at DFW, and then you look at Philadelphia, and then you look at New York, and you look at the half dozen to 20 to 25 homegrowns that these teams have, and it's like, man, I know Houston's doing some good work there. They're going to need that work to show fruit.
They're not doing that good of work. They're not developing MLS players. I'm sorry. And there's time to look.
That's what I'm saying, is they're going to have to figure that. It doesn't happen overnight, right? FC Dallas had like some green shoots of like, a couple, Ruben Luna, who didn't like really stick in the league. And like some of these other younger guys, Moises Hernandez, who's a full-time pro still, didn't, stick in MLS for more than, several years. He's an international, like good career. So like they had players like that. And then you started to see the next generation. And those are the guys that moved on. So, I mean, the academy doesn't happen overnight. Kellen Acosta is another one who was like, oh, this guy's a full-time pro. He could be an international. He is an international. And like, but then that next generation of Pepe, Chris Richards, Tanner Tessman, like that was the one that made the difference. And I just haven't seen it from Houston. It should happen.
And Chris Richards soccer in Houston.
He did pass through Houston.
I won't get that deep into it. I'll just say, listen, I think all these things have to get looked at. I think those points have to get criticized as well. Paul Holliker, the director of the academy, gets a lot of credit, maybe for doing a lot of social media, and I'm sure they do some great work. But listen, Paul Holliker, director of the academy, arrived in 2018. About 5 seasons here. I mean, I think that's good enough seasons to have gotten a 13-year-old, 14-year-old, have developed them along. There should be more names
in
the wings.
Yeah.
And there isn't.
Let's talk Austin FC, a team that is on the opposite end of the table as the Houston Dynamo. They still sit second place in the Western Conference after a 2-0 victory against Sporting Kansas City. Chris,
by the way, Austin's not sitting on their ass. They went and got Rigoni.
We're gonna talk about
exactly. We'll get there.
Let me talk about the cheese, man. Austin's not sitting on their ass. They signed. Oh no, someone already said that. Before we get into the signing, let's talk a little bit about the game, Chris. When I say it like that, hey, a 2-0 victory against one of the worst teams in the conference, it sounds quite academic. You know, Sebastian Drusi scores with, this is what we've come to expect from Austin FC, which is a credit on its own compared to last season. But this was a bit more difficult than I think Austin needed to make it. Sporting went down to 10 men pretty early in the game, a little bit before the halftime break, and Austin kind of struggled to kind of make that different show, even though they had a goal advantage. They weren't really killing off the game. A bit of a labored victory. Sometimes that happens away from home. But Chris, a tougher game in practice than it looks like as we're reading the score sheet.
Yeah, it was a weird night in Kansas City, which is, I feel like, something I find myself saying every time I come back from that stadium. There's always something weird going down when you play at Children's Mercy Park, and in this case, it was the refereeing, and I think that Josh was rightfully critical, but I thought it was kind of interesting for him to be critical when really the calls ended up going his way, right? Cameron Duke gets sent off right before halftime. Two of 5 yellow cards in the first half that are being handed out quite rapidly. And I think what Josh Wolf was sort of saying is that, he felt lucky that one of his guys, Danny Pereira, was in that mix getting a yellow card and mixing it up with some guys, including Cameron Duke on the play that he got sent off on. And then, Max Urruti had a yellow, Julio Cascante had a yellow. Julio Cascante and Danny Pereira end up going out at halftime. Basically,
I was about to say some management there, where Josh Wolf is like, I'm not getting these guys getting. Yeah,
there's no sense in playing Russian roulette, is what he said after the match. So anyway, that was kind of an interesting mix. But Alex Ring gets the goal right before halftime. It's a shocker from John Pulskamp right through his legs, and kind of. I don't know. The soccer gods are funny sometimes, right? Because last year we had this match in Kansas City where Alex Ring gets sent off with 2 yellow cards. Kansas City comes back and wins. And just last week, Andrew Tarbell had the ball go right through his hands, and both of those things went back in the favor of Austin. So I just think it's sort of some poetic justice there, or just kind of an interesting turn of events that kind of helped Austin on their way this time. And Sebastian Drusi, what can you say? The dude is on another level. He's quite clearly the front runner for MVP, and he's on top of the Golden Boot race now officially after scoring in the 90th minute to put this one away. Austin FC also had 4 goals called back for offside in this match, which was another theme of the night. That it really could have been worse than it was, but those guys just couldn't stay behind the line. So it was a fun match, a weird match, kind of a disjointed match, but in the end, 3 points, and you move on to the next one.
We're not trying to hate on second team or second option goalkeepers here, but Brad Stuver comes up big in this one as well after he missed.
That's
with COVID.
True. That's a good point.
It's nice to have him back for Austin FC. We mentioned missing Steve Clark in the Dynamo's case. I think Austin glad to have that sort of the communication at the back, and also obviously the shot stopping ability.
Yeah, saved a penalty kick against Daniel Shallowy that really played a big factor in this one, because it could have been 1-1 early in the second half, and then it would have been a completely different match. Even with Sporting Kansas City having 10 men, I thought that they showed themselves well. Really, just I thought it was sort of Sporting Kansas City's season in a nutshell. They got unlucky and had to play down a man, and off the loss on Wednesday.
What a frustrating week, huh? Yeah, because they lose that Open Cup game after going to a shootout. It's kind of like another like soccer gods thing, where it's like anyone can win a penalty shootout. They don't win, so their chance at a trophy, it looks like, it's totally up in smoke. They can make a run. They could make the playoffs, but looking
Yeah, I
pretty
don't know
dead
if
in the
that's
water.
I don't know if that's the focus. At least if you talk to people in Kansas City right now,
They're looking pretty dead in
playoffs.
the water. Austin FC, as I mentioned, I guess I kind of set up this dichotomy of like there's the mega teams of LAFC and Inter Miami and New York City to some extent that are like spending, buying stars. There's the teams like FC Dallas, Philadelphia Union that are building from the academy. I think Austin's kind of in this middle group, but they're a club that very clearly wants to have their designated player spots filled. Chris, after we talked last week about the Cecilio Dominguez issue being finally sorted, he's mutually agrees to go elsewhere. He's a Santos Laguna player now. Austin FC, they sign another designated player. They bring in Rigoni. Tell us a little bit about what to expect from him.
Yeah, they're getting their way closer to being, in that upper crust, aren't they? It's $4 million reported transfer fee for Emiliano Rigoni, and had a chance to catch up with Josh Wolf. You can get some of his insights on just sort of the background on Rigoni. The fact that, and this is the first thing in the story and a little bit more expanded on, but this is a guy that Austin FC's actually had their eye on for quite some, long before they even signed Sebastian Drusi. So, as Josh Wolf said, he was at a price point at that point that was not realistic for them to go after. I think it was when he was still, maybe at Zenit, with his loan stops there, and then ends up in Brazil. It's just killing it. And then, his form has dropped off, a lot more, if you want to get in the weeds on the reasons for that, I've written a little bit about it on the Striker, and I'll get more into that, talking with Josh Wolf about why they're so confident that this guy who's only scored 2 goals in 31 games is going to come in and make an impact. But, long story short, he was playing under Hernan Crespo, at Sao Paulo FC, and a fellow Argentine. Then Hernan Crespo leaves the club, and he just hasn't, had, in his mind, I don't think he's had a fair shake. He hasn't had, a good run of matches, and then, obviously his playing time dropped off for the last, when was the first time we got wind of this? 4 or 6 weeks ago. So he hasn't played, in that length of time. He's been training. They expect him to come in fit, but he's not, as far as I know, he's not in the country yet. He's still got paperwork issues to sort out. So, he maybe will get, at most the last 10 games of the season, probably a little less than that. And hopefully we'll be coming around the time of the playoffs. So, it's certainly a sign that could help Austin get over the top this year. But I think with 2 years and 2 option years, also, a guy they think that they can build around, along with Sebastian Drusi, as long as he stays around, which, I don't know what kind of offer could come Austin's way at some point. We need to start talking about that with a guy who's only 26 years old and about to be, potentially MLS MVP.
Yeah, do you think they would sell him
that's
before trying to win an MLS Cup with him?
Not
I
this year,
don't want
right?
to get too deep into the conversation, but if somebody offers you $15 million today, Victor, how to not take that?
Nah, but here's the thing. I think like if someone offers you $15 million today, but you think you could win MLS Cup with this guy and get 10 million from him in the winter, it's like crude math, but is the MLS Cup worth 5 million to you? I think like what I would say, kind of continuing the discussion about Rigoni, is like clearly Austin is a team who is trying to keep their DP spots full, who is trying to show ambition and to be good on the field, right? Like in theory, this is a guy who should help Austin get better on the field and win games right now or whenever he gets into the country. And even some of the other moves they've made this summer, I think, are like sort of aimed at the same thing, So I think like you see the ambition from Austin. They are, I feel, in a different tier as far as like willingness to spend. Dallas has spent a lot more. I don't think they're going to spend this summer. Maybe if like exactly the right player comes available and they can get that deal over the line, they might bring in sort of a role player piece. Houston, they spit big splash on Hector Herrera, and then after that we see kind of some
this move,
a little chip of money here, a little chip of money here. But I think Austin's in a different category.
Well, they got him on a tree of transfer, so it's not exactly like that.
Yeah. Rigoni comes in exactly 1 year after Sebastian Drusi was signed. And to me, that was the moment when, we finally got a peek behind the curtain of, okay, what is this club going to do? They spent, I think, $7 million on Sebastian Drusi. That's worked out great. They spent $4 million
That's been a hell of an investment.
On Emiliano Rigoni, who's 29 and, has plenty left in the tank as well. And, they're done with these, not done with, but, the first two DPs that they signed were bargain bin DPs. If we're being honest, Cecilio Dominguez, even before his off-field, incidents with the, domestic violence that ultimately ended up leaving him with
He wasn't
him
a big name designated player.
Independiente was begging to get rid of him at the time, and they sold him they bought him for $6 million and sold him for $2 million.
That was
Austin, 2.5 maybe. Yeah,
I think it's easy to toss ash on Cecilio right now. I think he was a big signing at the time. That should have worked out, right? That would have worked out.
He may have been, but he wasn't as
big in terms that he had played in Liga MX, and that he brought that side of it. But I mean, I think in the overall picture,
Rigoni.
This is the difference is that we're comparing big DP signings for Austin, and it'd be difficult to do that with some of the other teams in the league. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about one of those teams, FC Dallas. They get a 1-0 victory against the Los Angeles Galaxy. Another game in which FC Dallas wins, another game in which FCD scores and is able to protect the lead. That's something they're really struggling with since the international break. With a word that we keep hearing in English, in Spanish, I even asked a Dutch guy about it, is suffer. FC Dallas seems to be willing and able now to suffer, to deal with pressure, to soak up opportunities. This, I believe, was the second game in a row, obviously, that they've won, but also the second game in a row where the other team has had possession and sort of a lot more than FCD because they're happy to protect this early goal. Second game in a row where we've seen FC Dallas bring on a third center back around the hour mark to basically protect the lead, see the game out. 1-0, that's fine. They're missing a lot of chances to go up 2-0, 3-0, whatever, to score more goals. I think, you'd see FC Dallas playing in a different style if they were able to get up 2-0, 3-0, as compared to, the 1-0 that they have with these missed opportunities. But ultimately, you're seeing an FCD team that is kind of figuring out how to win in another way. I think that can be important in this league, Victor. It's something that other teams have to learn how to do. Now the key is, can FC Dallas, as they go on a very difficult week, traveling to Seattle, then traveling to Portland, kind of keep that momentum going and maybe show that they can win like we saw them win at the start of the season, with some more flowing football, with more goals, and without having to suffer so much.
Yeah, and I it's funny, right? Because they're kind of they're in the race, but they could easily go either way, right? Which I think it's different compared to when they started the season. I think we thought it was going to work out a little bit easier, and now it's it seems like they kind of have a balanced schedule to finish the season. Again, you can easily see this go any which direction. I think nobody questions the firepower they have up top. Why has it been so hard to beat those guys?
Yeah, I think that the midfield, you have Paxton Pomykal having a really good season. I wrote a column about him on the Striker last week saying that, so many people, when Paxton's name comes up, the question is just, is he going to go back to the national team? Is he national team quality? Is he ready for the U.S.? To me, that's not the question. This guy hasn't been healthy for years, literally years. He's enjoying his soccer again, and he's playing really well. To me, that's more important than, is he going in the national team this year? And also important for FC Dallas. After that, you look and you say, well, who else is in the midfield with him? Brandon Cervena, Siki sort of switching off, Edwin Cerrillo, Facundo Quignon switching off. And I think that oftentimes there's a little bit of a disconnect in getting the ball from the defense, where they're often winning it, to those attacking players. This time, Esteves tries for a 4-4-2, brings Franco Hart into the starting lineup, and within 9 minutes, a move that they had worked on the training ground comes off. Marco Farfan beats the defending winger before the fullback is able to come and challenge Farfan. He pings a great ball in there that came from nowhere. Hara scores with his first touch, nutmegs the keeper. FC Dallas is off to celebrate and off to protect the lead. So the things that they're doing are working. I just think that the central midfield could use more connection. If I were technical director Andre Zanota, and you ask me either now or in the winter market, hey, what do you need? Like, what can I offer you if I'm a player agent or something like that? I'm looking at 6. Quignon does play well sometimes, but I think he's just putting his leg.
You need somebody reliable,
just winning balls back, and I don't think you have that. Look, like he's a top quality player, and I don't think people really gave him his credit when he was here. But Carlos Grueso from FC Dallas, who's now playing in the Bundesliga, playing for the Ecuador national team, like he was a guy who not only did he recover and have that bite, but he had that next pass as well. And I think they're still maybe missing that a little bit. I think that's something that could make this team more fluid than they are right now. But
Yeah, John, 11 matches left for FC Dallas. These two you mentioned coming up on the road against Portland and Seattle. And I think, for general MLS fan looking at the standings, FC Dallas is one of these teams trying to hang on to a playoff spot, as you've got, teams like Seattle and Portland trying to chase down a playoff spot.
Yeah.
If they win, if they can get results in these two, I look at these two as maybe the most important matches left in the season for FC Dallas. Do you look at it that way, or how are you perceiving where they're at right now?
Here's the thing. I think when you say that, there's like sort of an elevated expectation. But I think if they come back with 2 points, if they come back with 2 draws in both of these games on the road, okay, it's 2 points in 2 games. They're probably dipping the standings. But I think it's a fantastic trip, right? I think like Seattle is
you're taking 4 points away from those other two teams is the point I think you're making. Yeah,
exactly. Or if you lose in Seattle, I mean, I think the Seattle game, it's tomorrow. Like I fly out to cover for the Striker at 6 a.m. tomorrow. I think FCD travels today. It's a time zone thing. It's on turf. Seattle has one more day of rest than you do. Think about FC Dallas. The typical game week is you play Saturday, Sunday off, Monday recovery, Tuesday light session, and you start to work Wednesday, Thursday, Friday a little bit light, and then the walkthrough Saturday. Their schedule this week is Saturday game, Sunday recovery, Monday walkthrough, and Tuesday game. It's all condensed, and this is a team that's not very deep right now. So, I think that game against Seattle, we're going to see some unfamiliar faces. Nico Estevez has not rotated this team very much. He's been sort of like an NBA coach in the playoffs where he says, my rotation, I've got 3 guys on the bench who I trust. After that, like everyone else is kind of there to make up the, get some fouls, and that's it. He's sort of been like that. I think he's going to have to give some young guys opportunities in the Seattle game because it's just physically, I'm not sure how you get ready for that Portland game if you also have these guys with all the travel and everything playing. So we'll see. Some of the typical starters are going to have to try and go, but I definitely think when you look at it through that context, if they come back with 2 or 3 points from this road trip, it's extremely important. But that doesn't lessen how critical this stretch is, Chris. And that's why I think these past 2 games, even though they suffered, even though they were ugly, I think were huge because, Victor, you're talking, hey, are they sliding? Could they drop out of the playoffs? But right now, yeah, maybe. But the question previously was basically, they're 2 spots away from the playoffs. You look at the standings right now, and it's like they're in the spots for a home game, which is kind of the goal, right? Like if they get a home game this year, Nico Estevez's first season as a manager, with the issues that they had last season, with the roster they have right now, you say, wow, like they really did it. And as well as they can play at Toyota Stadium, they snap a 5-match winless streak with this victory against the Galaxy this weekend, as well as they can play at Toyota Stadium. If they get a home playoff game, you say, shoot, this could be the best run from this team in years. They have to get there. They have to get to that upper spot. And I think that sort of becomes the goal because you look at how tight these teams are. And of course, I'm saying, well, look, if you come back with this 2 points from this road trip, it's a victory. But you could also say, well, you're playing the 7th and 9th teams in the Western Conference. You're the 4th team. You should get points from these games. We just know the historical context of who Seattle's the CONCACAF Champions League champions are, who the Portland Timbers are, and how tough it is to go to those places, especially back-to-back. So it is a big week for FC Dallas, and we will have it absolutely covered on the Striker. Hope you check that out. Hope you join us over there. I'll be covering FCD. Chris covering Austin. Victor covering Houston. If you're listening on the podcast, I'm pointing and trying to make sure I'm pointing the right way. It's
also just 3 days left in the secondary transfer window, so keep your eyes plugged to the Striker if we've got any developments there. I'm not totally sure. I did ask Josh. You'll see these at some point this week as well. I asked him, are you guys done? And he said, we'll see. So we will see.
We will see, and we will have that on the Striker. Make sure you check it out and subscribe. It helps us do what we do. As I mentioned, I'm with FC Dallas in the Pacific Northwest. Victor all over the Houston Dynamo and the fallout from that 6-0 loss. Chris with potential exciting news from Austin, and even if it's not, he'll have great digs into the games that they actually have been playing on the field. We also got All-Star next week, starting to look toward that. That'll be fun. We're going to have coverage of that with Chris and our own Phil West headed up to Minnesota, but all that stuff will be on the site, and we'll talk before then next week on the Striker Texas MLS podcast. Hope you join us then. We'll talk soon. Take care.